At 82, I've learned many lessons about life. But there is one decision I deeply regret: moving into a nursing home. At the time, it seemed like the right choice. My family encouraged it, promising that I would have all the care and comfort I needed. I believed them. I told myself it would make things easier, safer, and more convenient. But once I got there, I realized something no one had warned me about: life in a nursing home is not just about convenience. It changes everything. And once you step in, leaving is not as simple as you think. If you or someone you love is considering a nursing home, I want to share the 6 things I wish I had known before making this life-changing decision. Because once you move in, you can't go back to the life you had before. 1. Losing my independence was worse than I expected. The biggest shock wasn't the small room, the scheduled meals, or the unfamiliar faces. It was the realization that I was no longer in control of my own life. Before I moved in, I had routines. I decided when to wake up, when to eat, how to spend my day. I could go for a walk whenever I wanted, cook my own meals, or sit quietly with my favorite book. But inside the nursing home, my time was no longer mine. Breakfast was served at a set time, whether I was hungry or not. Lights were turned off at a certain hour, whether I was ready for bed or not. If I wanted to go outside, I had to wait for someone to be available to assist me. Simple choices: what to eat, when to bathe, even what to wear became privileges instead of rights. I remember my first morning there. I woke up and instinctively reached for my book, something I used to do every morning at home. But when I looked around, this wasn't my home, my books, my favorite chair, the little comforts I had spent years collecting gone. Instead, I had sterile walls, a bed I didn't choose, and a feeling I couldn't shake. I was no longer in charge of my own life. The hardest part: realizing that once you give up your independence, getting it back is almost impossible. You stop arguing when they tell you what's for dinner. You stop asking if you can go for a walk whenever you want. You learn to fit into their system, and in the process, you start losing yourself, too. I became invisible to the outside world. One of the hardest truths about moving into a nursing home is realizing that the world outside keeps moving without you. When I first arrived, my family reassured me, "We'll visit all the time." At first, they did. My daughter came by once a week. My grandchildren visited on weekends. It felt like I was still connected to my old life, but as the months went by, the visits became less frequent. My daughter started calling instead of coming. My grandchildren got busy with school and work. Holidays were the hardest. Everyone promised they'd come, but plans always changed at the last minute. Suddenly, I found myself sitting alone in a common room, watching other residents stare at the door, hoping today would be the day someone remembered them. It wasn't that my family stopped loving me. Life just got in the way. I remember one evening, holding my phone, debating whether to call my son. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to remind him that I was here, waiting for a visit that might never come. So I put the phone down, and that's when it hit me. This was my life now. Watching the days go by, hoping someone would remember to include me. 3. I lost my sense of purpose when I moved into the nursing home. I thought I was just changing where I lived. I didn't realize I was also changing why I lived. At home, I had responsibilities, routines, hobbies, and reasons to get up in the morning. Even the small things: watering the plants, making my own coffee, tidying up gave me a sense of purpose. But in the nursing home, those daily rituals disappeared. Meals were made for me. Cleaning was done by someone else. The plants? They weren't mine to take care of anymore. At first, I told myself it would be nice to relax. No more chores, no more responsibilities. Just rest. But after a few weeks, something was missing. The days felt long, stretched out with nothing to do but wait. There was a man named George, 84 years old, a carpenter his whole life. At home, he was always fixing things, building projects in his garage. But here, there were no tools, no projects, nothing to create. One day, he said to me, "I feel useless," and I knew exactly what he meant when you no longer have something to care for, something to work toward. Life starts to lose its meaning. The mind slows down, the body follows, and soon you start to feel like just another resident in a place where time moves, but nothing really changes. For my health declined faster than I ever expected. Before I moved into the nursing home, I was doing well for my age. I could still take care of myself. I went for walks. I cooked my own meals, but once I moved in, everything changed. I stopped moving as much. I didn't have to stand in the kitchen anymore. If I needed something, I could just push a button, and someone would help dot a T first. It seemed like I was just taking it easy. But the less I did for myself, the weaker I became. My legs felt stiffer. Getting up from a chair started feeling like a chore. I lost strength faster than I ever expected, and I wasn't alone. I saw it happen to others too. People who walked in on their own 2 feet were suddenly relying on wheelchairs. I met Alice, an 81-year-old woman who was full of life when she arrived. She told me, "I'm not going to slow down just because of a number," but after a few months, she wasn't walking as much. Then she needed a walker, then a wheelchair. One day, she looked at me and said, "I don't know when it happened, but I feel like I aged 10 years in just a few months." And that's exactly what it felt like, because when you stop using your body, you start losing it. Looking back, I don't regret growing older, but I do regret believing that a nursing home was my only option. If I could do it over again, I would have fought harder to stay in my own home. I would have explored more ways to get help without giving up my freedom, because once you move in, life will never be the same. If you are considering a nursing home, ask yourself, is this truly what's best for me? Or is it just what seems easiest right now? Because your independence, your choices, and your sense of self are worth holding on to for as long as you can. 5. The loneliness feels different. Loneliness is something many older adults face, whether living alone or in a nursing home. But what I didn't realize before moving in was that loneliness inside a nursing home feels different. It's not about being alone, but about feeling forgotten. Before I moved, I thought loneliness meant not having enough visitors. But here, even though I am surrounded by people all the time, nurses, staff, and other residents, there is a different kind of emptiness. At home, I had a life that was mine. Even if I didn't see my children every day, I had neighbors, routines, a sense of connection to the world outside. But in a nursing home, you become part of a system. People come in and out of your room on a schedule. Conversations become repetitive about meals, medications, or activities. The world outside feels far away. Even if your family only lives a few miles from you, there are moments when I sit by the window, watching cars pass, wondering what people are doing, where they are going, and how life continues without me. I've met people here who haven't had a visitor in months, sometimes years. I once asked an old woman, "Does your family come to see you?" She smiled sadly and said, "They used to," and I understood exactly what she meant. The hardest part isn't being alone. It's realizing that the world you used to be part of keeps moving forward, while you are left in a place where time stands still. 6. I lost the simple joys of living at home. Life was full of little things that made each day special. The smell of coffee brewing in my own kitchen, the feeling of sitting in my favorite chair, in a space that felt like mine. The ability to step outside whenever I wanted, to feel the sun on my face without asking for permission. I didn't think about these things much before moving. But once they were gone, I missed them more than I ever expected. Here, everything is routine. Meals at the same time, activities at the same time, lights out at the same time. There is little room for spontaneity, for choosing how I want my day to unfold. One morning, I woke up craving pancakes with syrup, something I used to make for myself on Sundays. But here, breakfast was already decided for me. I asked if I could get pancakes. The staff smiled politely and said, "Maybe next week, when it's on the menu at home. If I wanted pancakes, I would have made them." But here, I had to wait for permission to enjoy something as simple as my favorite breakfast, the smallest freedoms: what to eat, when to wake up, even what music to listen to slowly disappear in a nursing home. And that's when I realized the truth. Losing control over the little things makes life feel smaller, emptier, less like your own. 7. Some people give up too soon. One of the hardest things I've seen here is how quickly some people stop trying, stop moving, stop living fully once they enter a nursing home. I've watched people who are still strong, when they arrived, become weaker, not because of age, but because they lost the will to keep fighting for their independence. I met Richard, an 80-year-old man who used to go on daily walks. But once he moved in, he started relying on staff for everything: getting up, moving around, even dressing. Within a year, he was using a wheelchair. Not because he couldn't walk, but because it was easier not to. I met Elaine, a woman full of stories and laughter, when she first arrived. But after a few months, she started staying in her room more and more. She no longer participated in activities, no longer made an effort to connect with others. When I asked why, she sighed and said, "What's the point?" I realized that when people feel like they've lost control over their lives, they slowly stop living, and that's the scariest part, because when you stop having things to look forward to, when every day feels the same, it's easy to fade into the background of your own life. I promised myself I wouldn't let that happen to me. So every day, I find ways to hold on to the parts of me that matter, whether it's through reading, writing, or even just reminding myself that my story is not over yet. But I've also learned this: the best way to hold on to your independence is to fight for it before you lose it, because once you enter a nursing home, the fight becomes much harder. 8. The feeling that I no longer belong in my own life. One of the strangest realizations after moving into a nursing home is that the life I once knew, the one I built, the one I was comfortable in, no longer feels like it belongs to me. At home, I knew where everything was. The kitchen held memories of family meals. The living room was filled with the laughter of past conversations. Even the quiet moments sitting on my porch, watching the seasons change, felt like pieces of my story. But here, everything feels temporary. The walls are not mine. The furniture is not mine. Even the people around me change constantly. Residents come and go. Staff rotate, and nothing feels permanent. It's like living in a place where you are just passing through, even though you may never leave. I've spoken to others who feel the same way. People who once had full, vibrant lives now sit in small rooms filled with just a handful of things from their past, reminders of a world they used to be part of, but are now separated from. One day, I overheard a woman whisper to herself, "I used to have a life," and I understood exactly what she meant. 9. The guilt of being a burden. One wants to be a burden. But once you're in a nursing home, it's hard not to feel that way, even if your family tells you, "We just want what's best for you." There is a part of you that wonders, did they put me here because they didn't want to take care of me? Even if they visit, you start to notice the way they glance at the clock, the way they seem relieved when it's time to leave, and even if they don't say it, You feel the unspoken words. You're someone else's responsibility now, I remember. The first time my daughter came to visit after I moved in. She smiled, sat with me, asked how I was doing. But something had changed. The way she spoke to me felt different, like she was speaking to someone fragile, someone she had to check on rather than simply enjoy spending time with. She didn't mean to make me feel like a burden. But I felt it anyway, and the hardest part, realizing that at some point, I had stopped being the parent and had become the dependent. 10. The harsh reality of watching others give up in a nursing home. You see the truth of aging up close, the struggles, the loneliness, and for some, the decision to simply stop trying. I have seen people arrive full of energy, only to fade within months. I have seen once strong individuals lose the will to fight for their independence. I have seen people who, at first, talked about going home one day, but after a while, they stopped mentioning it altogether. One man, Tom, was a retired mechanic. When he first moved in, he told me, "I'm only here until I get back on my feet." But after a few months, I noticed he stopped talking about leaving. He stopped trying to walk without his walker. He stopped caring about the things that once made him feel alive. And then, one day, he simply wasn't there anymore. That is the hardest part of being in a place like this, watching people slowly give up. Knowing that if they had stayed in their own homes, surrounded by the life they built, they might have held on longer. 11. The regret of not exploring other options. Looking back, I wish I had known that a nursing home was not my only choice. I wish someone had told me that there are other ways to get care without giving up independence. I wish I had explored in-home care that could have helped me stay in my house. Senior living communities that still allow for freedom. Family arrangements that didn't require moving into a facility. I made the decision to move because I thought it was my only option. But now I see that I had choices, I just didn't take the time to find them. And that is my biggest regret, because once you enter a nursing home, going back is not easy. The home you once had may no longer be available. The strength you once had may start to fade. The independence you once enjoyed may feel like a distant memory. And if I had the chance to do it all over again, I would have fought harder to keep my life in my own hands. 12. If I could do it over again, I would choose freedom. If I could turn back time and make the decision again, I wouldn't have chosen to move into a nursing home. I would have explored every possible way to keep my independence for as long as I could, because once you step inside, it's almost impossible to go back. I would have looked into hiring in home care so that I could receive help without giving up my space, my schedule, or my comfort. I would have talked to my family more openly about other options. Rather than assuming that this was the only solution, I would have planned ahead, not just for financial security, but for how I wanted to live in my later years, making sure I had a say in my own future. But I didn't, and now I wake up every morning in a place that doesn't feel like home, surrounded by people I barely know, waiting for visits that come less and less often, and I wonder, what would my life look like if I had fought harder to stay in the world I built for myself? 13. The hardest truth. Nursing homes are not about living, they are about waiting. The reality that no one tells you before you move into a nursing home is that these places are not designed for living. They are designed for waiting, waiting for meals, waiting for medications, waiting for the next scheduled activity, waiting for family to visit, waiting for the months and years to pass, and eventually, waiting for the end. I don't say this to be dramatic. I say it because it's the truth that too many people only realize once they're already here. In a nursing home, time moves in a way that is different from the outside world. The days feel long, but the weeks disappear quickly. The seasons change outside the window, but inside, everything stays the same. And as I sit here, watching another sunset through the glass, I wish I had known how it would feel to become an observer of life rather than an active participant. 14. My advice to anyone thinking about a nursing home: if you are considering a nursing home for yourself or a loved one, I ask you to think carefully before making this decision. Do not assume it's the only option. Research home care services, assisted living communities, and family arrangements that could help you maintain independence. Think about how you want to live, not just what's easiest right now. Convenience should never come at the cost of your freedom. Talk to people who have been through it. Don't just rely on brochures and promises. Ask real residents about their experiences. Make decisions while you still have a choice. The sooner you plan for your future, the more control you will have over it, because once you give up your independence, getting it back is almost impossible. 15. The final thought: fight for your freedom while you can. If I could leave you with just one message, it would be this: hold on to your independence for as long as you can, because once it's gone, you'll miss it more than you ever imagined. Live in your own home for as long as possible. Stay engaged with the world. Surround yourself with people who make you feel alive, because at the end of the day, life is meant to be lived, not just waited out.